Hi everyone. Today's episode is sure to blow your socks off. I have 3 stories that reveal fascinating information that will make you wonder if the things you know are really true. You might even reconsider everything you've ever learned. But first, please snuggle up and pull your socks up tight, then get to know that subscribe button. Thanks. Now let's get into the stories. Great Smoky Mountains, July 2014. My name is Joshua, and I want to share with you a story about a strange encounter I had in the beautiful Great Smoky Mountains National Park. You see, I've always been fascinated by the mysteries of the wilderness there, so I often find myself exploring its wonders. This time, my adventure took me deep into the heart of the park. It was a sunny morning in July of 2014, and I had set out on a hike along the Trillium Gap Trail. The trail wound through dense forests, beside sparkling streams, and past towering mountains. I was hoping to catch a glimpse of some elusive wildlife that called the park home. Little did I know that I was about to encounter something beyond my wildest dreams. As I made my way through the trail, I felt a mix of excitement and anticipation. Suddenly, a rustling noise caught my attention. I stopped in my tracks, trying to locate the source of the sound. I looked around. Nothing was there. But then I saw it. A creature unlike anything I had ever seen before. It stood tall, with dark fur covering its entire body. Its large, muscular frame reminded me of the legendary Sasquatch. At first, I felt a surge of fear shoot through my veins. My heart raced and my breath quickened. I had heard stories about mysterious creatures lurking in these woods, but I never expected to come face to face with one. However, as I observed the creature more closely, I realized that it didn't seem aggressive or threatening. Instead, there was this sense of calmness and curiosity in its eyes. The encounter took place near a clearing not far from the trail. I cautiously took a step closer, hoping to get a better look. The creature, seemingly unbothered by my presence, remained still, watching me with an air of intrigue. I could hardly believe my luck, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to study a creature from the realms of myth. Overwhelmed with a surge of curiosity, I decided to take a chance and try to communicate with the creature. I spoke softly, introducing myself and expressing my fascination. To my astonishment, the creature seemed to understand me, and it responded with a series of deep, rumbling sounds that almost resembled words, but I couldn't decipher their meaning. As the minutes turned into what felt like an eternity, the encounter between myself and the creature continued. We communicated in our own unique way, sharing a connection, and somehow talking to each other. It felt as if we were 2 beings from different worlds, but meeting briefly in this hidden corner of the park. During our interaction, a second person came upon the trail. It was an elderly hiker who had been exploring the park too. I watched as he approached, and he finally saw what was going on. He then stood there in awe, witnessing the extraordinary encounter unfold before his eyes. He remained silent, understanding the significance, but he had no direct relationship with the creature or me. Eventually, we both watched as the creature retreated into the depths of the forest, disappearing as mysteriously as it had appeared. The hiker and I were left standing there, awestruck and filled with wonder. The encounter had definitely left an indelible mark on us, and we knew that life would never be the same. The man continued on his journey. I watched him as he walked off. He told me what an extraordinary experience it was for him, and that he was going to ponder how to move forward with the information. As for me, I couldn't help but feel a mix of joy and sadness. Joy for having witnessed something truly extraordinary, and sadness knowing that many people won't believe my story. As I made my way back along the trail, my mind filled with thoughts of the creature. It hadn't acted wild towards me, like bears that I've encountered in the past. It displayed a gentle and curious nature, leaving me with a sense of awe rather than fear. It made me question the assumptions I had about untamed wilderness. and the unknown creatures that might inhabit it. Ultimately, this encounter ignited a newfound passion for me, for the mysteries of nature. I started then to dedicate myself to learning more about unknown creatures that might inhabit our world. I also began volunteering at wildlife conservation organizations, supporting efforts to protect and preserve the habitats of any magnificent creature that might live in our midst. Thanks for letting me share my brief but incredible encounter. Jacksonville, Florida, March 2007. It was late March of 2007 when I saw it. You probably wouldn't believe me if I told you. It's just that I've got to share it with somebody. Anybody. I figured maybe if more people knew about it, well, maybe someday there might be some real answers. That has to count for something. It might one day even save some lives. Who knows? Maybe they'll collect other encounters about it. So, here goes. I was just a kid when it happened. We were in the middle of soccer practice. It was a late, sunny afternoon, but nothing too blinding. This was back when I was still dreaming of going to Berkeley. One of my teammates kicked the ball really hard. I started for it, but the ball sailed straight over my head and out of the park, across the street, and into a cluster of tightly woven trees. It was weird it would land there because most of the land around the park was grassy and open. But I just dismissed it, and I glanced from side to side in case there was any incoming traffic. The streets surrounding the park weren't overly busy. I watched as one car, a common sedan in navy blue, passed by. Everybody was impatient for me to get the ball, and so I just shrugged and crossed the street. I could see greenery to my right, and as I jogged across the hot pavement, that's when I saw it. My teammates were much too far away to see anything, but right behind the ball, something was moving. Something big. I honestly thought it was a stray dog at first. Anyone would have if they had seen it too. The dark, fluffy head of rust-colored fur could have easily belonged to a Malamute or even a long-haired German Shepherd. It could have even been a cross of the two, I suppose. I watched as the canine's nose wrinkled up and down, taking in each of the scents of the soccer ball. I watched in fascination as it continued to lean closer, and since I liked dogs, I stupidly called over to it, thinking it was friendly. But that's when it happened. The dog glanced up at me, and it began to stand up on its hind legs. I remember the impossibly long shadow as it fell over me. This thing must have easily been twice my size. Whatever its true height was, I was scared, and I'm not exactly the type that's scared easily. Yet in that moment, I could feel the blood drain from my skin as the dreaded creature stared me down with soul-piercing gaze. The yellow eyes were burning embers of something. Something almost human was staring straight through me, almost like it was judging whether or not to let me go. I couldn't pry myself away. Its gaze was absolutely mesmerizing, and there was a dangerous sort of intelligence reflecting back from deep within its eyes. Something far older and much more mysterious than its furry predecessors. I stayed where I was for what seemed like a long time. There really wasn't anywhere I could go, to be honest. I wasn't sure how fast the creature could run, but I was willing to bet that it was a lot faster than me. I was in good shape. I was a kid, but with legs that long, there was no way I could even stand a chance. The thing's stride had to have been more than likely 2 to 3 times mine, and I would imagine it closing the gap between us in a mere heartbeat. The creature then let out a low, guttural growl. It rumbled out like a curious warning, but it didn't sound anything like a dog should have sounded. It was almost like there were 2 different vocal cords. And whatever that thing was, it didn't like me. Now that was fine with me. I didn't much like it either. I couldn't tell its gender in the shadow between the cluster of trees, but it didn't really matter. I bravely reached out with my trembling arm and I pointed toward the ball. And then I watched as the thing used one of its massive clawed paws with nails, reach out, and gave a mighty swing. The ball shot out like a slingshot. I immediately made a dash for it. As I moved, I kept a close eye on the thing and watched at the same time as the ball sailed high over my head. And then it landed. The ball bounced once, and it shot forward into the grassy area. I was breathing hard as I picked it up, and then, in sheer curiosity, I turned to glance once more at the beast. To my great surprise, it was already gone. I scanned the horizon for any sign of life, but there was none. My teammates were now shouting loudly from somewhere behind me, and yet I had not paid them any attention. I was too wrapped up in my own thoughts. Eventually, I gave up on the hopes that I might one day see that thing again. Whatever it was long gone. I hurried and took the soccer ball back to my teammates, where I immediately shared the story with them. They all looked at me like I was crazy. I kind of thought I had lost it too there for a moment. They figured I was just making an excuse for why it took me so long. In the end, I never did see that thing again, although I went back a few times to that same soccer field and looked. Maybe it was just passing through the area, like some sort of a wandering gypsy. After all, I now believe that anything is possible. Though I think the real question is, what does everybody else think? Newark, New Jersey, September 2019. I had been working at PATH, the Port Authority Trans-Hudson rail system, for about 4 years at that point. The network is further out than the central lines of the New York subway, which I had also worked on a few years earlier. But this line was no less full of problems. It seemed like every day my engineer buddies and I would be called out to fix some fault or adjust some rail that was malfunctioning. It wasn't exactly the greatest job, but it paid well. And if you had the right crew with you, it could be a decent gig, and you could enjoy some laughing as you worked. That wasn't to say that sometimes it wasn't creepy, especially if you're working sections on your own. Sometimes it did feel really weird down there. You would step off the platform where everything was nicely lit, and the people were just standing around waiting for the next train, and then you would step into and hit this sort of barrier. Most times I didn't think about it. I would just bang on my headlamp and stroll merrily into the tunnel. But recently, close to the time that I saw what I saw, I had become a lot more nervous about it, a lot more aware. It didn't help that a few weeks earlier I had read an article about the dogs in the Russian subways. A few genetics guys had shown how, over time, breeding dogs for their friendliness to man resulted in other side effects, where those same dogs passed on traits of being cuter, more juvenile looking, and having shorter muzzles. They also proved that the opposite was happening in the subways. Dogs in the tunnels that were living as scavengers had stopped showing traits that separated them from wolves. Their snouts were getting longer, and they were becoming more muscular and aggressive and far less trusting of man. Packs of these feral creatures were apparently roaming parts of the Russian subway system, and I guessed it wouldn't be long until they were stalking around over here. Many of my coworkers had reported hearing growls and scratching noises in the tunnels. One had even seen a shadow of a dog moving along one of the inside walls. We took it so seriously that there were notices about it in the break room. Any sightings of dogs in the tunnels was to be reported. You'd better believe I reported mine. I was going to work on a signal switch that had been failing. It was a one-man job, and even though we were supposed to go out in pairs, I gave Cameron an early lunch break so that he could catch the game. I told him I could handle the job myself. No sooner had I crossed that threshold out of the light and into the dark of the tunnel than I knew it was a mistake, and I wished that he was there with me. There was a sound in there, some kind of a low rumbling that sounded like an animal or something up towards the other end of the tunnel. I looked back over my shoulder to the light that I had left behind me, and now I was a good 200 feet into the tunnel, and the light looked like a little disc, far away in the distance. The further I got from that disc, the less safe I felt, and the louder the sound became. Now, it's difficult in those echoey tunnels to judge exactly where a sound is coming from, but after a few more steps, when the noise, definitely a growl, seemed to get louder, I decided that the signal outage could wait. I turned and I started heading back toward the light, toward the disc that marked the opening of the tunnel, and for me, safety. And that's when I heard the growling, clear and unaltered by the echo, directly to my left. Slowly, I turned toward the sound, and I saw what made it. In the time since this happened, I've had numerous people tell me it was just a dog, that because I had only seen it by the light of my headlamp for a few seconds before I panicked and ran, they said I'd only seen a flash, and that my mind was terrified and filled in the blanks. But that's not true. I know what I saw, and it wasn't a dog. If anything, it looked like some kind of a cross between a dog and a man. From my lamp, I just caught a glimpse of its snout, and the teeth hanging under those horrible yellow eyes. The points of the pupils were tiny, and they almost disappeared because of the brightness of my light. It's hard to explain, but even though it was an animal, or it looked like an animal, the way the skin and the fleshy parts around the eyes that weren't covered in hair folded and wrinkled in on themselves, that was human, like a human face. There was expression in its eyes, too, and the creases around them. You could read the expression and the emotion that it was showing. At the moment that I flashed my light onto the thing, the expression was rage. The thing then moved towards me, and there was a flash of shaggy gray fur. Judging by where the face was positioned and how far below the ground would have been, this thing must have been standing well over 7 feet tall. That is no dog. I screamed and I hurtled toward the other end of the tunnel, never looking back once, and hoping, praying, that whatever it was hadn't chased me. In my report to the company, I did not write about a dog sighting. I said as clear as day that I had seen a dog man. I handed in my report at the same time that I handed in my notice. My coworkers say that there has been no further message of any of it, and needless to say, I've never been back in those tunnels, and I no longer ride the subway.